And this brings us to the moment that we've all been waiting for. But before that, I have a quick question for you all. So, has anyone ever noticed that ever since they were young, we've always been taught the things we needed to know? But has anyone ever really taught us how to learn efficiently? Who here was taught how to learn efficiently? Anyone? By a show of hands, anyone at all? Okay, well, isn't it quite surprising that we as learners over decades of formal education has never really learned how to learn efficiently? That all can change now. Barbara knows how it feels to struggle firsthand with math and science as she flunked her way through math and science courses in high school. But when she saw that her lack of mathematical and technical savviness limited her options, she returned to school with a newfound determination to retool her brain to master those very subjects that once were her obstacles. Now, with over 26 years of going back to study the subjects she hated, she has earned a PhD in professional engineering and is today's distinguished professor of engineering at Oakland University in Michigan. Her research focuses on the complex relationship between neuroscience and social behavior, and her works were described as revolutionary by the Wall Street Journal. Her books has been praised by many leading researchers and writers, and she is also a New York Times best-selling author. Her famous course on Coursera, Learning How to Learn, provides advices on tackling daunting subjects with lessons learned from recent neuroscience discoveries. That is why we brought her here today, so she can share with us her myriad teachings for us to have a better understanding of how we learn. So it is an honor to have her and her lovely husband, Phil, here with us today on this special occasion. It is the utmost pleasure that I introduce to you an inspiring soul, a cheerful, spirited, good, gracious friend of mine, Barbara Oakley. Let's give her a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. It's such a great pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Nisha and Vic, and Pat, it's just a wonderful pleasure to be here. I am so happy to be here, and I am from Oakland University in Michigan. And so Oakland University, sometimes they think Oakland is in California, right? Because there is that town, right? But here is actually me in Michigan about to go to work at my day job. So Michigan is quite different than California. We do not have palm trees as you do here. So I teach this course you might have heard mentioned called Learning How to Learn. And my co-instructor is a fellow named Terry Sinowski. And there's Terry. He's the Francis Crick Professor at the Salk Institute. But this is Terry going to work at his day job. So that is the difference. That's one of the wonderful things about online teaching is not only can students get together from very different parts of the world, but professors can get together from different parts of the world as well. So I was shocked because I was invited to speak at Harvard. I was a nervous wreck. I mean, it's Harvard, right? And then when I came in the room, I was shocked because it was filled, standing room only, all around the edges. And I thought, why are there so many people here? It turns out that Terry's in my one little course, Learning on How to Learn, had on the order of the same number of students as all of Harvard's massive open online courses put together, made for millions of dollars with hundreds of people, and we did ours in my basement, right? So a very small room. But the thing is that learning is something that is incredibly important, as Bick has kind of let us know. So here you can see from the World Economic Forum, if you look at the 10 skills that you need to thrive, in 2015, these were the 10 skills. Do you see learning on there? No learning. Okay, so how about 2020? Any learning? No learning. What about the top 10 skills that are anticipated to be needed in 2025? Guess what? Active learning and learning strategies has suddenly magnificently appeared very nearly at the top. So people are beginning to realize that learning is a really vitally important aspect of society and advancement. And what's cool is that you in Thailand can easily leapfrog up to the lead of the world. I'm traveling all around the world, and there is fantastic interest. Like on this trip alone, so here I am speaking in Dublin, but look, all these countries this is where I'll be speaking on this tour. People are really excited about moving their country forward. Of course, I'm also working with the UAE and many different countries as well as the US. In the future, so this spring I'll be speaking at the Karolinska Institute, which is where the Nobel Prizes for Medicine are awarded, at Eden and so forth. There is fantastic interest. What is really remarkable is many of the theories of learning of the past were based on no information about how the brain functioned. But now we have remarkable new information, and we can really move forward in ways that are very helpful for everyone, much more so than with these kind of outdated and outmoded theories. So I should probably, though, back up for just a minute and give you a little bit of information about my background. So what I want to do in this presentation is I want to give you a little bit of background about where I'm coming from, but also we'll all get on the same page. So we'll get a little bit of background. You will become budding neuroscientists as a result of this presentation. But once we're on the same plane, then I will present some of this new material. Isn't it fantastic? How do movies grab our attention? Wouldn't you like to know? Neuroscience is beginning to let us know. And we can take some of that movie-making magic and use it to improve how people learn. Bring it into education. So that's what I'll be moving into in the latter part of this presentation. So for me, backing up again, I grew up moving all over the United States. So by the time I was about 15 years old, I'd lived in 10 different places. Now the thing about moving a lot is that let's see if this pointer works. No, not on this one. So I was 7 years old, and I was moving from Texas to Massachusetts. And, I was just a little kid, and they were suddenly far ahead of me in the multiplication tables. Well, here's my little secret. I didn't like math anyway. And I just looked at the multiplication tables and said, well, everyone is far ahead of me. I really don't like this stuff anyway. So I gave up at that point when I was 7 years old. And as Nisha had mentioned, I flunked my way through elementary, middle, and high school math and science, which is really ironic, seeing as how I actually am speaking with you here today as a distinguished professor of engineering. Who could guess? My parents would be like, no, But the thing is, we can all, well, one day I was teaching one of my engineering classes, and one of my students said, he found out about my sordid, terrible past as a math flunky, and he asked me, how did you change your brain? And I thought about it. I mean, I was this little girl, and I like this picture of me because it is the last cute picture of me. But I loved animals and knitting and weaving and all those kinds of things. I knew I could never grow up and do anything technical. So I thought, well, what I'd like to do is just learn another language. And I know for you, it's like, been there, done that, nothing magic. But for me, it seemed magical. But I couldn't find out, I couldn't afford to go to college and learn another language there. But I found out there was one place I could go and learn another language and actually get paid for it, and that was to join the Army. So this is me. I am looking very nervous because I'm about to throw a hand grenade. And if you knew how clumsy I am, you would know why I look so nervous. But I did learn another language. I learned Russian. And here I am. I worked out on Soviet trawlers up in the Bering Sea. I have so many good drinking stories. It's kind of amazing. But I just loved having new adventures and seeing the world through other perspectives. So I also ended up at the South Pole Station in Antarctica, and that's where I met my husband. The thing is that when I was 26 years old, I was going to get out of the military, and at that time, I had one particular special expertise that I had trained for, and that was the Russian language. So I'd done everything that people had told me to do. I had followed my passion, and no employee opportunities were arising for me. Now, all my fellow employees in the Army, many of them were West Point engineers, and so they were easily finding job opportunities. But for me, nothing was jumping up. And I began to realize that by following my own passion, I had actually put myself in a career box. I hadn't thought about what the world needs. So what I should have been doing was not only following my own passion, but broadening my passion so that I could enjoy what I was doing, but also make sure that I had good employable skills when I finished my education. So back in the day, when I was 26 and I got out of the military, I realized that I should try to see, since I really liked new perspectives and new opportunities, that I should try new perspectives and new opportunities in my own mind, see if I could change how I was thinking about things. And so I went to the university and I started with the lowest math available, which was remedial high school algebra, and slowly began climbing my way upward. It was not easy, but if I had known then what I know now about learning and what SCB is teaching, I could have made it so much easier on myself. So what I'll share with you here to get us all on the same plane is information from great research about how we learn effectively. So the brain, as we know, is a pretty complicated place, but it has one fundamental building block, at least from our perspective, and that is the neuron. So I wish you could see your faces now. Your faces are like, oh, this is where she gets to the super boring scientific stuff, right? So let's spice it up a little bit. This is our metaphor for a neuron, and that is a space alien. So metaphors are powerful tools for teaching and for learning because they can help us get the most important ideas. And in fact, an important idea here is that neurons have these kind of legs that come out off of them, and those are called dendrites. So I show 3 legs here, but a real neuron can have 3, 5, or even hundreds of legs. And dendrites, or these dendrites have little toes on them. Those are called dendritic spines, and you will see these dendritic spines are extraordinarily important. So we're going to see them again and again through this talk. And then a neuron has like an arm that reaches out of its head. Since it's a space alien, they can do that. And that's called an axon. So what neurons like to do is they like to reach out with their arms and tickle the toe of an adjoining neuron. That's kind of all they do, really. I mean, in some sense, what they're really doing is they're sending electrical signals that travel along the axon, jump this little gap called a synapse, and then continue on to the next neuron. And what this is really doing is it's simply connecting together a set of neurons as you learn something. So I show 5 neurons here, but actually they're clusters of hundreds or thousands of neurons when you are learning something like how to take a derivative in math, or how to conjugate a verb in that horrible English language, or how to play a musical instrument. Whatever you're learning, you are simply creating clusters of connected neurons in long-term memory. You may have heard some experts saying things like, this is the new age. You don't need to remember things because you can always look them up. This is the worst advice for learning possible. It's important. Would I be able to speak Thai if I just used Google Translate to look it up? Of course not. I need to have the essentials in my own long-term memory. So the question is, how do you get those essentials into your memory? Well, we do know that practice is a great way to do this. It strengthens those neural connections. But the thing is that when you practice, the magic of practice is that it helps create nice sets of connected links between neurons, and those are strong and easy for you to pull into mind. So when I talk about things like metaphor, like using a space alien for a neuron, what this is really doing is you have a set of links, you know kind of what a space alien is, and when I say things like legs and an arm, that already gives you an idea that you can use to bridge what you're learning out of your previous knowledge into what that new knowledge is. And bridging information like this using metaphor is a much easier way to learn things. So this is part of why metaphor is such a great tool. So now we are going to have a little active exercise. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you, what is the most common technique you yourself use for learning? So I'm going to give you 4 things. So I'm going to present the 4 things, and then we'll go back over them, and you can vote with which technique you use. So the first technique that we commonly use, that I certainly used a lot when I was studying engineering, is simply rereading the materials. Or we can highlight or underline that material. We might use something called retrieval practice or recall, which is like using a flashcard to see and check whether you know something, or is it creating a concept map? So concept map is you draw out the key concepts and see how they relate to one another. So now let's do a poll. So those who often use rereading as their way of learning, raise your hand. I have often used this technique. How about highlighting or underlining? Oh yeah, that's a real big one. Okay, retrieval practice, recall. Okay, we've got some of you, and concept map. Okay, many of you. Okay, so this is what's interesting. I can always tell people who have been trained in education or they've read a little bit about education because they choose this one. But guess what? Research, Jeff Karpicki did a really important study that was published in Science with his undergraduate student, and he compared these 4 techniques, and what he found was this technique really doesn't work very well at all. Neither does this one or this one. It is retrieval practice that is the key. So I know some of you who are fans of learning how to learn, you are there with your hands up with retrieval practice. And why is it so effective? It's something like this. When you are first learning something, you get these weak sets of links. But each time you try to retrieve it from your own mind, you strengthen those sets of links. So you look at it, you read it, and you think, oh, I'm getting it, because it's right in front of you. But it's only when you look away from the page and see if you can retrieve it from your own mind, that's when you're actually strengthening those neurons, not when you're just looking at it. So this simple little idea is something that is invaluable for students. Why aren't we teaching this at an early age? One great thing, though, is the Thai traditional ways of teaching often value these kinds of approaches that have been dismissed by some Western reform educators. So again, by vaulting forward using some traditional techniques from Thailand, you can actually be in the lead with your educational approaches. Now, what happens though if you don't retrieve? Let's say that you are taking a course online from the Academy and you're so pleased you took this class, you watched a video, and then you got really, really busy. So you couldn't actually retrieve the material you just learned for several weeks, right? Because, you're busy, you're taking other classes and so forth. In the meantime, what has happened is this. Your little synaptic janitor has gone and swept away those dendritic spines that were not being used. And this is why you can tend to forget the things that you've learned. Retrieve, 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 and that is what's going to strengthen these ideas for you. And we can see this actually before. This is a fantastic technique called light microscopy. And you are all, as I mentioned, budding neuroscientists now. And so this is a dendrite, the leg of that neuron, and these are dendritic spines. And so what do you think? This is a dendrite before learning and before sleep. So what do you think that dendrite, that same living dendrite, looks like after learning and after sleep? Do you think it has a fatter leg? Or maybe more dendritic spines? What do you think? Let's see. Everywhere that there's a blue triangle, you can see that there's a dendritic spine here that was not here before. And this dendritic spine, you can see it's bigger, stronger at the end. And that was not the case before. So sleep with learning helps to build those connections. Now, we only see one dendrite here, one neuron. We don't see the connections because, it's science. Give the scientists a break. It's hard enough just to get an image of one living neuron as it's growing and learning. So in the future, we will see the actual connections, and we will see how they strengthen at night when you're sleeping, as well as during the day when you're learning. But this brings me to a little trick that can be very helpful for learning. And that is, do your learning during the day just as you normally would. So let's say you catch one little half an hour of study somewhere during the day, or maybe a couple hours if you're lucky. But at night, right before you go to sleep, take 2 to 3 minutes and retrieve the key ideas that you want to remember or better understand. What this will do is it will signal your brain, those are the important connections. And your brain during sleep will send hundreds of signals over those pathways and strengthen those pathways during sleep. So that little trick of pulling something to mind right before you go to sleep, maybe even a couple minutes to pull it to mind when you first get up in the morning, can help you to learn more efficiently and faster, because we all have busy lives. So every minute we can learn more quickly, it will be a benefit for us. Now, this also brings another idea to mind, and that is, we often think, I have no time for learning. There's just no way I can go and take a course and remember all this stuff. But there is plenty of time during the day. Think about it. When you're taking a shower, you can retrieve key ideas. When you're falling asleep, you can retrieve key ideas. When you're commuting on a bus, there are plenty of times during the day that you can be retrieving, and that's actually a key aspect of learning. So remember all those little spaces where you actually can learn. You have far more time than you think you do. But this also brings me to, it isn't just retrieving. It's retrieving multiple times over many days. This is called spaced repetition. So if you have, let's say you have 5 hours to learn. If you space it out so it's 1 hour per day over 5 days, that means you'll learn some, make connections, and when you sleep at night, it will reinforce those connections. Learn, sleep, reinforce. Learn, sleep, reinforce. If you do it like 5 hours in one day, cramming, you don't get all that reinforcement of sleep. It makes weaker connections, and those weaker connections are much easier to sweep away. So again, I love metaphors, and a good metaphor for you to remember is building a brick wall. When we're building a brick wall, we take our time. We lay the layer of bricks, some mortar, bricks, but before we go too high, we take a little time. We let that mortar dry, if we don't take our time as we're building, we end up with a structure of learning that's kind of like this. It's a very, very poor foundation for learning. So learning itself is, it's not all mush up here. It's actually a structure. And in that sense, it's very much like building the muscular structure that we have when we become an athlete or a marathon runner. You can see that this guy did not sit down the night before a big championship meet and think, I'm just going to cram and lift some weights. It took time to build that muscular structure. Because we don't see into the brain and we're often not taught about learning, we make the mistake of thinking, we can cram, but that muscular tissue and the neural tissue both take time to develop. So sometimes people will say, procrastination, it's okay to procrastinate until the last minute, say if you're writing a report or something like that. Maybe it's okay, but actually procrastination when you are learning is a bad thing because it takes time to develop. To develop that learning structure. Now, learning is a lot like baking a cake. It has many different aspects to it. So let us change what we're speaking about just a little bit and step back from the direct neural connections to instead talk about the two major modes that the brain uses for its learning and for its actual interactions with the real world. So these two different modes are focus mode and what I call diffuse mode. Focus mode is what you're doing hopefully right now. It's focusing. Diffuse mode is more like, neuroscientists call diffuse mode the default mode network. Psychologists call it the task negative network, and they call focus mode the task positive network. But what all these terms really mean is, one of them is when you're focusing, and the other is when you're daydreaming, mind wandering, like what you're doing in the shower, riding a bus or something when you're not focusing or retrieving. To better understand these two different modes, we will use a what? Metaphor, yes. And the metaphor we're going to use is that of a pinball machine. So if you're my age, you remember pinball machines. But you're probably not my age, so let's just remind you how they work. You just pull back on a plunger, and a ball goes bouncing around on these rubber bumpers, and that's how you get points. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this pinball machine, and we're going to put it right on the human brain. Are you ready for it? Okay, here we go. Pinball machine on the brain. And this is our analogy for the focused mode of thinking. So you can see it's focused mode because these pinballs or the rubber bumpers are close together. And in this mode of thinking, we often have patterns that have been laid because we've already learned something. It's those neural connections that we talked about earlier. So, for example, let's say you already know how to multiply numbers, like I didn't know earlier. You will have a pattern, and if I ask you to multiply 22 times 77, your thoughts would move right along. You might write down the multiplication problem or maybe do it in your head, but you've already got those patterns so you can follow along as you're solving this problem or understanding this concept that you may have already worked with. But what happens if you are learning something completely new? So, for example, let's say that you want to be learning division. You don't know it. Well, what can happen is your mind can slither back up as you're trying to solve your first problems back into multiplication because you've already learned multiplication. You feel comfortable with that. It's easier for you. And the result is you sit there looking at the division problem and you just cannot get the right answer. And it doesn't even make sense to you. You sit there and you go, oh, why did they write the book so badly? And then you get so frustrated, you close the book, you walk away, and eventually your focus gets off of that division problem. When it gets off that problem, it's like it releases your mind into the diffuse mode. And what does it do in the diffuse mode? Your thoughts can range much more broadly. You can't think in that careful, focused way you can when you're in the diffuse mode, in the focus mode, but you can at least get to the new place you want to be in when you are trying to solve that problem. In fact, what happens with learning is we often go back and forth between focus mode and diffuse mode. And so when we're in diffuse mode, then we go back and we look at that problem again, and guess what we think? This is so easy. Why didn't I understand it before? And it's because we had a little time to kind of work in the background with that diffuse mode kind of thinking. So learning involves going back and forth between focused and diffuse mode. If you can't figure something out the first time you look at it, as with me when I was learning multiplication when I was a little kid, if someone had told me it's perfectly okay, just take a step back and take a little break instead of me thinking, oh, I'm just stupid, then it would have made it much easier for me. But you might think, yeah, but super smart people, they can really get it in focused mode much more quickly than I can, for example. You might think of yourself as a slow learner. Guess what? If you learn more slowly, as you will see in this presentation, you can learn even more deeply. So if you don't get it really, really quickly like someone else can, you can still get it. And even though it may take a little time, you can get it really, really well. So you can't really be in both modes at the same time, unless you are taking certain forms of mushrooms, and I am not advocating that here. But also, it turns out that people with ADHD, with attentional difficulties, when they focus their attention, they inadvertently, because of the wiring, their dopamine neurons don't really quite give enough dopamine, so they focus, and guess what? The diffuse mode pops up at the same time. So that's why you can be talking to someone with attentional difficulties, and they'll be looking at you and, ooh, shiny. They get distracted, and their attention goes on to something else. It's not that they want this. It's the way their brain is wired. But what this does is helps give them real creativity. So part of what we want to be doing in society is nurturing these individuals who may find it difficult to learn in some traditional ways, but if we kind of give them the tools, they can be very successful and add to society's creativity. So one thing, though, is, and I kind of mentioned this before, that I don't know about you, but I have this big problem. It's called procrastination. Do you guys have a problem with that? I mean, usually everywhere I go around the world, people are like, nah, sorry, In Norway, we are the best procrastinators. In South Africa, no, we're the best procrastinators. It turns out that every country has problems with procrastination. And the reason that people procrastinate is when you even just think about something you don't like or don't want to do, it activates a part of the brain that experiences pain. So what do you do as a consequence? Well, you think about something you don't like, don't want to do. It activates that pain, so you turn your attention to something more pleasant, and the result is that you feel happier almost instantly. You do it once, do it twice, no big deal. Do it very often, and it can have severe long-term consequences on your ability to learn and to be productive in your job. So I'm an engineer now. Let's just cut to the chase. What's the best way to deal with procrastination? You know it. It is, Nisha says, the Pomodoro Technique. And this technique was invented by an Italian, Francesco Cedillo, in the 1980s. It's super simple. And I literally have gotten thousands of emails from people, from learners of learning how to learn, who talk about how this technique has made an enormous difference in their life. What is this technique? Super easy, unless you talk to an academic, in which case it's a simple 47-step process. But no, we're going to make it super easy here. All you have to do this Pomodoro technique is first turn off all distractions. So no pop-ups on your computer, nothing on your cell phone. Good luck if you have a 2-year-old at home. But then you set a timer for 25 minutes and work as effectively as you can for those 25 minutes. You know that some thoughts are going to arise like, oh, I've got to remember to stop by the bank or go to the store or get this. When those thoughts arise, just do the mindfulness thing. Let them go by and return your focus to whatever you're working on. And when you're done, give yourself like a 5-minute or so relaxing break. If you think about that, I've just kind of clued you in. Focus mode, diffuse mode. This gives you a wonderful combination of both ways of learning. In the past, we've always thought that learning only took place when you were focusing. But now we understand it takes place when you're focusing and when you are in diffuse mode. In fact, that little rest where you are not focusing is where your hippocampus kind of turns around and says, this is really a time. It practices and reinforces those ideas in long-term memory. But it can't do that if you're still getting information in from focus mode. So just this reward period, what is your tendency? It's going to be, okay, I did my Pomodoro. Let's just take a peek at my phone, right? Let's see if I got any text messages. What does that mean? Oh, you're like, oh, I got a text message. And then you respond, what are you doing? You're going right back into focus mode. So those 5 minutes are 5 minutes to be bored, to have a cup of tea, to listen to a favorite song, to something that is really mindless, not focusing, because that will help your brain to consolidate the information that you've just learned. So the Pomodoro technique is extraordinarily effective and useful. And what you can do is sort of like have a little bit, whoops, let's go back here, sorry. So have something like 1, 2, 3, 4. So after the first Pomodoro, 5-minute break, 5-minute break, 5-minute break, and then a half an hour break. There's really good apps for Pomodoro. So a great app is called Forest. That's one of the people's favorites. So that's a good one for you to take a look at. Now, when it comes, though, to multitasking, so how have you heard, people bragging about, oh, I multitask, I attend several meetings at once? Every once in a while, people can, there are a few people with the dopamine genetics that they actually can multitask. So they're called supertaskers. Odds are you are not one of those people. We fool ourselves about what we can do. In fact, switching tasks is a way to lose productivity for the vast majority of people. So there's two kind of types of multitasking. We've got task switching, and then we have what's called dual tasking, which is, this is something like you're reading a book, but also listening to music. So you can do both of those things, and that's a form of multitasking that many people do. And so the one you want to watch for is task switching, because what happens with task switching is your efficiency goes way down. Let me give you an example. So so count to 10 in your mind in English or Thai. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Easy, right? Now you can say the letters from A to G. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Easy. Now let's switch tasks. 1A, say it with me. 1A, 2B, 3C. Okay, you're slowing down as you're getting, can you see how much harder it is as you're switching those tasks? That is why you want to try to avoid task switching, because it's almost like a plant. You plant you've got your plant, those neural roots, and then you're pulling them up and switching your task. Then you pull it up and switch tasks. You can see that's very inefficient. So some people can task switch. Those are called emergency room doctors, or perhaps a world-class race car driver, but and maybe a world-class chef. They have to do many things and kind of think of it at once. But there's different kinds of minds. I would not if I had a relative that had cancer of some sort, I wouldn't want a super tasker to be their cancer doctor, because I don't want them sitting there going, oh yeah, I got this, oh yeah, I'm answering the phone, oh, and I'm doing this too. I want somebody who focuses very deeply and can do that. So there's really, there's a lot of demand for really being able to focus and do something very, very well. Now, we often hear, though, that we should never multitask, and I just want to bring to your attention that creativity can arise from multitasking. So if you're really stuck on something, just kind of looking at something else for a little bit can sometimes unstick you from whatever you're stuck on. So now I want to talk, we're going to again switch gears, and we're going to talk about working memory, long-term memory, and octopuses. So this is another aspect of learning. And working memory, hopefully, if there's no cognitive psychologist here, is there? There is one? Huh? Okay, so close your ears a little bit if there is one. Working memory is pretty much the same as short-term memory, at least as far as we're concerned. So working memory is like what you're holding temporarily in mind in your prefrontal cortex, And long-term memory, obviously, is what you hold in long-term, keep in mind, or that you are able to remember. Now, working memory, you can often hold something like 4 pieces of information. So I'm representing my little attentional octopus of working memory by these 4 arms here. That means it can hold 4 pieces of information. And long-term memory is kind of like a set of lockers that are scattered through the brain. Inside those lockers, of course, are the links of long-term memory. And when we're learning something, our working memory is creating those sets of links, and it puts those links in long-term memory. Later, it can go grab those sets of links and pull them easily to mind. Which brings us to my husband's and my younger daughter, Rachel. So you might ask, so we made the Learning How to Learn course remarkably cheaply. It was less than $5,000, mostly in our basement. You might wonder, how on earth did you make this course so cheaply? Whenever you need someone to play a role, get your family members to do it. They will work really cheaply. They will work for food. So here's our younger daughter. I asked her if she would model what it felt like for her when she was first learning to back up a car. So she was like, sure, because she had recently learned to back up a car. So watch her little face as she's backing up the car. She's like, do I look in this mirror or that mirror? Or wait, which way do I go? And then, it just is like going off the wrong way, and then off she goes into the ditch. So the thing is, when you're first learning something difficult, what happens is your working memory has what's called a heavy cognitive load. Which way do I turn? How do I look? And it has no available extra arms for looking at anything else or thinking about anything else. Don't even try to talk to someone who's learning how to back up a car, because you're going to distract them and they can't do it. But once she learned how to back up a car, it was very easy for her. All she had to do was think, I want to back up a car. She pulls those sets of links to mind, and she has a light cognitive load. In other words, she's got other arms of her attentional octopus that are free to do things like, think about what's playing on the radio, or are my seatbelts fastened? So the ultimate idea is, when we are learning anything, we want to have already worked and practiced with key elements so that our little working memory can sit down to a test or a project that we're working on and easily pull together the relevant sets of links and make connections so that you can creatively solve the problem or understand the concept. Now, let's say that you don't practice, you don't use retrieval practice. Retrieval practice, remember, is how you check and keep from fooling yourself whether something is just in working memory or whether you put it in long-term memory. So if you just have it in working memory, you didn't do retrieval practice as you were preparing, then when you sit down to a test or to actually work on the problem, you realize at that time that it is not stored in working memory. So it's these kinds of things that can really make, just knowing those little bits about things like retrieval practice that can allow us to learn so much more effectively.